have to take 100% of your money, 100% of your liquid net worth, and buy one stock, and you cannot touch it for a decade.
Okay.
What are you buying and why?
I'm going to be spending a lot more time in here with you lot because I love it in here. I fucking love it!
Jason.
Music doesn't get me going every time still.
Jason, I made a horrible mistake last night.
Oh, God.
As you know, I got a little rugrat at home who needs to be fed in the middle of the night. And look, it's 2, 3 a.m. You realize you're thirsty. You've been asleep for a while. I'm in Florida. It's sweaty, and I reach for a bottle to take a drink. I like to reuse my plastic bottles throughout the day. Not like a Poland Springs bottle, but like a shaker bottle. And I fill it up and I drink it down. And what I didn't realize was that it had like pre-workout residue just caked. And next thing you know, it's 3 a.m. and I'm doing jumping jacks. Like,
oh my God.
Man, so I've been up for a while. After the come down from the pre-workout, we had some pretty violent thunderstorms, which I'm a light sleeper. So then I was up all morning. So this will be a fun show. I think I've been up already for like 8 hours today.
Oh man, there's so many things in there actually. One, I was trying to remember like all different things I've accidentally drank, and I want to say when I was in college, late at night, of course I was just doing homework. But I remember at a friend's house late at night, I was like, oh, like that Coke looks good. I went to drink the Coke and it was their spit cup. Yeah.
Oh, that's
not
really
a good
gross.
One. Not a good one at all. And then pre-workout scares me. Honestly, like I've never taken pre-workout. I don't know. Like it just seems like it get you way too jacked up. And like, I shouldn't even probably drink caffeine with my heart issues, but I still drink it anyway.
Yeah. My problem is I have a massive iced coffee every morning. I'm an iced coffee guy, by the way. Like I refuse to drink hot coffee. I'm iced through and through. So iced coffee to start the day. I'll have a latte in the afternoon with 2 shots of espresso. Pre-workout. I am so immune to caffeine at this point. I have fried my nerves. But what's funny, this is sort of weird. A lot of people talk about they have like a caffeine addiction. People will say, Corey, you're full of shit, but I can just stop drinking caffeine whenever I want. I have zero physical repercussions. Like I don't get the migraines, but I am psychologically addicted to it. Like it's part of my ritual. And so I don't feel like the day is started till I pour the coffee.
No, I unfortunately though, I quit from time to time and I do at least get headaches. Not quite migraines, but I will get headaches depending on how much coffee I had before then. But like you said, it's addictive to the ritual. Like allegedly, I would bet like people's cigarettes, it's just that ritual. You'll love this when
it might be the nicotine.
Yeah, well, but also it's like
it might be.
There's the ritualization and the fetishization around a lot of it. Like you said, that's what's so great about coffee. But back in the day when I used to work in restaurants, all my coworkers in this like hotel we worked in, they would all take smoke breaks, and it was totally kosher for them to take smoke breaks. So I would take them with them. I wouldn't smoke. I'd just stand out there and like have a coffee. I'm like, if you get 10 minutes off, I get 10 minutes off.
I think that's a good point.
And then to your point, like, yeah, I fetishize coffee way too much and have all the rituals around it. But what I do find though, even with because I have like heart arrhythmia stuff, is the actual cold brew is so much better for me, even though it's a much higher caffeine doses. So I'm not sure if it's the caffeine. Whereas when you're doing drip coffee, especially in a maker or even a pour over, with the hot coffee process, you're getting a lot of the alkaloids out of there. And I think there's a lot of research on this. Like actually you get the shakes from the alkaloids, not necessarily the caffeine. So actually when I have cold brew, which is, maybe double or triple the caffeine, depending on what you drink, I have zero problems when I have cold brew. And then even in the afternoon, like you said, I'm a maybe espresso guy in the afternoon. And like you said, it's so funny to me. All the Californians are like, I never have coffee after noon because like there's the half-life of the caffeine. And I'm like, you and I are like, I'll take an espresso after dinner at 11 p.m. and still just conk out.
Absolutely. By the way, I always have to laugh whenever I hear those financial pundits talk about, oh, you should, don't get Starbucks. You could retire early if you just made coffee at home. Like my coffee addiction is so expensive. What they don't talk about is like once you go down that rabbit hole, you're like, well, that coffee maker is no good.
Yeah.
I need to upgrade. I need a better coffee maker. The Nespresso pods that I buy, oh, I can't just buy the regular ones. I need to buy the special Jamaica Blue Mountain ones. Anyway, look, this is Pirates of Finance. This is a coffee podcast.
We should make a coffee podcast.
A coffee podcast where your hosts really don't know a whole lot about coffee. Though I do want to ask you about your recent coffee explorations, coffee grapefruit, because I'm curious about that. But this is the show that is ostensibly about finance, markets, economics, less so about that, but just investing in general. It's certainly not advice, just two guys chopping it up. This time, not on a Friday afternoon. This is a Wednesday morning because this is the Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego summer for Jason Buck. But let's get started. So I do want to ask you about your coffee and grapefruit situation, but I actually do have some finance stuff to talk about today. So I kind of want to.
Who wants to talk about finance?
I know. Well, I have some questions for you. So if I give you the platform to talk about the coffee grapefruit thing, how long are we going to be talking? Is this going to be the whole hour?
Well, like you can't leave it dangling. I want to talk about coffee and I want to talk about sleep though that you brought up. But first of all, I'm offended that you said neither of us knows that much about coffee because I've gone way deep down the rabbit hole of coffee.
I shouldn't have lumped you with me. I apologize.
Thanks. Yeah, because I mean, I've done everything from roast my own to try like every maker on the planet. But what you find, I think, at the end of the day, is even if you're have a perfect like one head La Marzocco and everything, and you're measuring out your grams and all that stuff, is even the water content can change. And so, like the best like baristas are even testing the water every hour and seeing how the water change, atmospheric pressure changes, especially like when you're in California and you started off that morning so cold, and the temperature swings by 50 degrees that day. You have to constantly temper the machine.
Okay, so I need to pause you there.
Yeah.
You know how like there are those athletes who like they think about the food they eat. I know you know these people, right? They are like, I can only put the purest ingredients in my body. I remember reading something from Matthew McConaughey years ago. I don't know why this guy keeps popping up in my life as an inspiration of ridiculous quotes and philosophies, but he was basically like, yeah, I'm in super good shape, but I don't want to just eat like, chicken breasts and broccoli. And it wasn't a matter of him saying like, I don't want that to be my diet. He was like, I want to treat my body like a diesel truck. Like I need to be able to operate just as efficiently on all the perfectly good, like very natural, super healthy stuff, as well as if all I can get is a McDonald's cheeseburger, I don't want to be doubled over in pain. I want to be the diesel truck. I think about that when you start talking about like, the baristas are testing the barometric pressure. Like, I don't want to have such good coffee taste. That if it's not like, no, I want the dull taste buds to a certain extent because that feels like it ruins the process for me.
Well, I think you've actually proven your point because you drink Starbucks cold brew with I don't know what kind of milk you put in there, so that gives you an example right there of that you don't mind having burned beans. But yeah, you don't want to go down the rabbit hole because then it's leads to a sense of fragility. And that's what I'm saying. I got to the point where it's like it needed to be so dialed in. Like, who cared? I was even roasting my own. By the way, you'd probably enjoy it. Fun experiments. Like, you can roast on just like a baking sheet. You can roast in those old popcorn makers from the 1980s. Remember the ones like spit the popcorn out the top?
Yeah.
You could do all that. Homie of the show, Adam Tkachuk, like, he with his physics degree was like using these crazy like leaf blowers and heaters, and like he had some crazy setup. I remember at one point. But yeah, that's why I said I go way deep down the rabbit hole and then you have to dial it back. And to your point, like, I think that consistency wise, that's why I end up getting cold brew because a lot of baristas aren't that good and they're not tempering the machine that much. And most people are just pumping out coffee. So I find myself, especially when I'm traveling around the US, I end up getting like Stumptown cold brews from like the local Whole Foods.
And so I want to correct the record. I know that you have seen Starbucks cold brew in my refrigerator before. I don't drink Starbucks cold brew. That was what I had at the time. It was because stock cold brew was not being carried at the time they were out. I'm sorry.
Stock is so much better than Starbucks.
Well, listen, I am a very basic bitch when it comes to some of this stuff. You know, I'm all banana bread and Starbucks any day. I don't mind Starbucks. I fully believe that, hey, you want to Starbucks cold brew is better than a lot of the other stuff I get. You know what I sort of think it's like, honestly? You know, like the craft beer explosion that happened in the US, and everyone just started making weirder and weirder and honestly really shittier beer, but everyone was such a snob about it. They're like, oh no, I like this. I often feel that way with some of the coffee that I get. I'm like, this is actually really horrible coffee. This is not good. Like, Starbucks isn't the best, but at least it's fairly consistent wherever I go. I can be at any airport in the United States and grab an iced coffee and know what I'm getting. It's the McDonald's of coffee.
Exactly. You want that consistency. Like, yeah, for example, there's like subculture down in like West Palm Beach that their cold brew has a very Ethiopian blend that has that sourness to it. So you'd probably just think it's terrible. It's just like that slightly sourness that I actually like. But to your point, it's like you want consistency. And so it's no shade on Starbucks. I don't hate Starbucks at all. It's just not my preferred coffee. Like, I understand why they have to burn the beans because you're roasting at such large quantities, and most of their customers are adding milk and sugar, and so you need that foil to really offset it. And the other thing I always bring up is like, you would not have this third wave of coffee without Starbucks. So I actually celebrate Starbucks. Otherwise, I would never have these like local baristas and everything, because they were the first ones to open up the door to people paying, you know, $3 to $5 for coffee. So without them, we wouldn't have.
I like this turn of face. I celebrate Starbucks, but I shit on Corey for drinking it.
Yeah, it's terrible coffee, but like I'm glad they came along. Like, otherwise I wouldn't have good coffee to drink. And then you're saying the going to espresso and grapefruit.
Espresso and grapefruit. What's the logic here?
It's not logic. As you know, I love espresso tonics too, which I'm surprised are not more popular in this country. I think they will be in this next year. Maybe I'm just too early on it. But basically, you're taking espresso, you combine a tonic, you get like a little bit of that sweet, bitter combined, you know, with especially tonic with the bitter of coffee, and it just blends so well together. So then I started experimenting because I learned from La Colombe here in the Philly area. They make summer shandies with lemonade and grapefruit combined with like espresso. And so then I started working on my home espresso here, like in Philly, and I have like this perfect. It's just a large glass with ice with pink sparkling grapefruit from Fever Tree, and then I top it off with a ristretto espresso, so I get the right amount. So it's basically like probably 4 to 5 quarters sparkling grapefruit over ice, and then the ristretto espresso. So it's only like 20% espresso, and that seems to be the perfect blend. Everybody can attenuate what they want, but like, man, once you try it, it's impossible to describe, but like once you try it, you'll see what I mean.
I'll have to have you make me one. Okay.
Yeah, that's no before finance, because who cares about finance? I want to come back to sleeping at night, and you said you're a light sleeper. I am an extremely light sleeper. I like to justify it that if we went back to caveman days, like we had to be on high alert at night, and therefore it justifies me being a light sleeper. Like, how do you think about it?
I've never thought about it before. I just think that I don't sleep well. I don't have a good reason. I'm very sensitive to light. I'm very sensitive to sound. That said, what's funny is I'm not someone who would do like dark curtains, like the blackout curtains or stuff like that. I just sit there and be like, well, now I just can't sleep because there's a street light outside, and I wouldn't do anything about it. I'm an idiot when it comes to my sleep, and then I get way overtired. Then I eventually crash. So it's a very unhealthy pattern. But yeah, I've got no good. I like that you spin it into a positive. Like, oh, this is an evolutionary advantage for us.
Yeah, I got to fight for my family. Like, I got to protect the family, right? Like,
sleeping like shit is definitely an evolutionary advantage.
But part of it is, I wonder, I can't remember if it was recently, it was either Sarah Silverman or Amy Schumer, and we're talking about like sleep hygiene. And like you're saying, going down that rabbit hole of coffee that can lead to fragility. I feel like everybody, especially our cohort or Californians these days, says all these, you know, they listen to Huberman, or as some people call him, Father Drew, which is my favorite way of calling him, is like everybody has their sleep hygiene and they're going to do all these things for their sleep. And like number one is like turn off your phones or iPads or no screens in the room. I am never, ever going to adhere to that. Like the idea of turning off your phone or your iPad 3 hours before bed is never going to fucking happen.
I did try to do the blue light glasses thing for a while. Like I'm gonna wear those a couple hours before bed, and then I was like, first of all, I don't think this actually does shit. I do put my phone into night mode, which is supposed to help. Like it
I
just
do
goes
that,
black
yeah.
and it goes black and white. It's supposed to kill most of the blue light, but yeah, it's too hard. I've got a whole bunch of stuff going on, and especially with like a kid now, there's a lot of times that I'm working right up until I go to bed because I put him down and
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I got 2 hours to get stuff done.
Yeah, like you said, I use the thing on my phone that like night shifts to like the allegedly more red light, doesn't necessarily go black and white. And then that was just making me think, I'm surprised you had a kid if you were wearing those glasses at night, because those things are just the worst. They're so unattractive. And it reminded me of Dave Asprey, actually, because we were talking about coffee and his whole like coffee is mold ridden and all this stuff. I went down a deep rabbit hole of figuring that out. But like any decent coffee doesn't have mold on it. It's total bullshit.
Okay. All right, Jason, I'm actually taking us into the world of finance.
Finance.
I'm doing it. Finance. I got a question for you. This is a two-parter, but we're going to start with the first part. And I'm going to give you a very restricted question. And the idea is I just want to hear you think it through. And the question is you have to take 100% of your money, 100% of your liquid net worth, and buy one stock. And you cannot touch it for a decade.
Okay.
What are you buying and why?
Two things jumped to my mind, first of all. One was either LVMH or Berkshire Hathaway, and both because conglomerate effects. And I just think they have the better runway. But 10 years, I mean, there's still a lot of timing on 10 years, but like given a 10-year time horizon, if we wake back up in 10 years and maybe I don't have to sell it on the 10 years, I can maybe hold for 2 or 3 more just in case we're in a deep recession or something. Even if Buffett dies, those systems and everything they have in place, I'd still probably bet on Berkshire. And then LVMH is just unbelievable. And I mean, even though the price and multiple are probably high now, so I'm not factoring that in, is over the long term, I think people like to show off. You know, people like to flex. So I don't think LVMH is going anywhere either, even if Arnaud dies as well. He's got his kids like deep into the roots of that. So he's even got a better succession plan maybe than Buffett, unless maybe his kids destroy it. But I got to go with some sort of conglomerate. And then I'm trying to think of maybe even more boring conglomerate than Buffett. What's the real estate one? What can I think of it right now? Not Brookstone. It's close to, like, it sounds like Brookstone. Shit. They have a bunch of malls, and they've been a Canadian company originally, and they've been around for decades, and they compound like crazy.
Blackstone?
No. It's a pure, like, they're much more of a real estate play, but they also ventured out into like server farms and all sorts of tangential real estate plays. Brookfield, right? Brookfield. Yeah, Brookfield.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm looking for like something that has broad diversification, some sort of conglomerate, something that's fairly boring, or taps into human nature like an LVMH. What are you going with?
Those are good answers. So I was wondering whether you would pick Berkshire, because that was one after a while. I was like, the conglomerate, I think, is the easy answer to a certain degree, because you're saying I'm just trying to buy a diversified basket of businesses, right?
Right.
Berkshire, I think the hair there is potentially that, the Buffett, if Buffett's around or Munger's around in a decade, I would be shocked, right?
Speaking of your healthy diet, and it doesn't matter, like the Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, it feels like a decade is like long enough to say, okay, there's likelihood going to be a leadership change at Berkshire. How much does it matter? I don't know. Does it potentially depress the valuation in the short term? Maybe, but I also think that there's a potential for a strong value tailwind just based on where value spreads are today. So that started to go in my head and saying, okay, what do I expect to happen over a decade, right? What effects still persist? Fundamental growth is certainly important, but that is a period over which valuation compression or expansion can occur, right? You can have sentiment shifts that is a long enough cycle. If I said 30 years, that's very different than 10 years. It's very different than 3 years. Sort of why I like this game, because it's a little like, what do you think is going on in markets? So Berkshire was definitely one on my list. I purposely didn't start thinking internationally because I think that would open things up. But then I said, okay, what other, consumer staples are sort of out there, right? Could you go with the General Mills, the Procter and Gamble's, that sort of stuff? I started thinking about the tech names a little bit. And I went, I'm not sure I want to buy Apple. I'm not sure I want to buy Amazon. I'm not sure I want to buy Google, Netflix, and Video. Like I was trying to think through who's most likely to still be in a dominant position and not face a regulatory issue. Microsoft actually came to mind.
Mm.
Microsoft is a pretty darn well diversified tech company that I feel like, and I haven't looked at their valuations recently, but I feel like doesn't get as much limelight as the other tech names. It's not as much regulatory pressure, but it's got a lot of the same server business that an Amazon has, right? It's got the whole operating system business. It's got a whole games division. Like there's some interesting diversification there. So that was one that came to mind for me. But I think we were both thinking the same way, which is how can you buy a single ticker with the most diversified lineup possible that's unlikely to get in trouble over a decade?
No, this is great. And just to clarify, you and I are not stock pickers. We don't care
Oh,
about picking
no.
stocks, but this is like an interest. So this is definitely not advice. But I like thinking about through the tech names, right? Like you just said, like for some reason, Google and Facebook make me nervous. Amazon, I think pretty solid play because they have their tentacles everywhere. So they're essentially like a conglomerate, right?
Yeah, but
Are you
could,
worried
you
about
could have
breakup
a
risk?
huge, breakup risk, monopoly risk with Amazon, right?
But
The
wouldn't that be even better
regulatory,
for you? What I mean is like if they
uh,
split up, we usually when stock splits, right, you get a percentage of the stock split. So
yeah.
even if they split, unleash some entrepreneurial creativity, which has happened so many times when they split up, like AT&T,
But so
the baby
10
bells, all
years
that
though,
stuff.
right? So
Yeah,
think this through. Like I think there's the timing risk. You know me
right,
and timing risk. Like
right.
there's a timing risk of if a regulatory issue happens in the next 2 years, I think it'll get resolved over the next 8, and that could be a tailwind to getting that diversified portfolio. But what if it happens at year 9, right? And then all of a sudden, the uncertainty
Yeah.
reprices the stock significantly lower right at the end of 10 years.
Well, that's the hard part. Is I think that's why I was trying to negate timing risk of like, are we buying at a too high a multiple? Like if you have to buy today, right, and then you have to
Right.
sell right on 10 years, like you
Yeah,
said,
you have to
that's a
buy
whole different
today and
dynamic.
sell on 10
Okay.
years.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's a whole different dynamic. And then I was going back to like Apple makes me nervous because it's highly fashionable and could go out of fashion. And it's not necessarily as broadly diversified. I do like your play with Microsoft because like, the server farms and everything they're getting into. And it seems like they've been, getting better and better at building almost like a broadly diversified conglomerate as well. But they've dealt with regulatory breakup issues before.
They have, but they haven't been as much in the headlines lately. And they've also gone through multiple different leaderships, right?
Yeah.
So I said
Yeah.
they've already figured out the institutional
Right.
DNA to sort of survive the. Now, maybe they just happen to get a succession of decent leaders, right? But I said, okay, if there is another turnover, I'm more convinced that firm knows how to handle it than some of the other big tech names.
That's an excellent way of thinking about it. And then not thinking about timing risk. But then the other tech or software I was thinking about is obviously Constellation Software out of Canada.
Yep.
And then even more, what jumped in my mind because it's top of mind for me is Topicus, which is their European version. And so what scares me, and I'm curious your take on this, when I think about like that VMS or SaaS software, is like when we have GPT 4, 5, 6, are people able to spin up individualized bespoke SaaS software within their business using GPT? And does that absolutely kill the entire like Constellation thesis of the VMS space, especially if we're talking 10 years forward? So if I'm worried about that, I would actually probably go more Topicus because that's their European version. And I feel like the Europeans are always behind us in a way. So maybe that gives you a longer runway there. But also they're buying at such low multiples and they're taking their time. They're so broadly diversified. I mean, they bought hundreds of companies last year, like at sub 5 million. I mean, it's really impressive what they built.
Well, so you bringing up Europe brings up another interesting point, which is the consideration of currency revenue diversification. Right? Is 10 years a period over which you say, I want to be fully subject to local currency risk, local inflation risk? Do you want a globally diversified company that not just earns revenue in multiple jurisdictions, but actually holds cash in multiple jurisdictions around the world, right? I think most of the conglomerates we mentioned do, but it's just another thing that comes to mind over what bets are you willing to make over a 1 year, 10 year, 30 year horizon?
Well, I'm gonna tee you up for this one. Is like, how do you think about when everybody's talking about geographically diversified stock markets and everybody's home country bias, but when your home country is the U.S. and we have these international conglomerates that are pulling in revenue from 50, 60, 70 countries and then holding it offshore in like Ireland, like, what are your thoughts on, do you need geographic diversification if you have a broadly diversified U.S. conglomerate?
I think we've discussed this because it comes back
Yeah.
to, I mean, one of the key points being the currency hedging point, right?
Right.
And to me, yeah, when you buy the S&P 500, you have a massively globally diversified portfolio where you've got revenue coming from all over the world, you've got expenses going all over the world. In theory, they should be hedging their own currency risk. So when I think about hedging my currency risk, it's really about what are my liabilities in the future. But that said, right, as an American with American domiciled businesses, there is still inherent risk that is purely domestic, geopolitical risk. You could have massive social unrest. So yeah, I mean, like that home country bias does matter. But I also tend to go in those sort of extreme situations. Again, am I going to be able to get my international securities? Like, am I going to get access to those if the geopolitical unrest is so bad that big names like Coca-Cola and Procter and Gamble and Microsoft are struggling because of their domestic U.S. exposure?
Man, that was actually bringing up Coca-Cola. That might be top of my list for a buy too.
Coca-Cola was there. All right, so let me expand this for you. Now the question is, you have to buy 10 stocks. And I'm not going to ask you to say all 10, but how would you think about finding those 10? And now it's pure buy and hold. So you buy in equal weight at the beginning and you can't touch it again.
Hopefully that's just my reception and not your mic, but I got a little static on that. But so hopefully we're completely fine.
Don't you do that to me, Ricky Bobby.
So buy and hold, no rebalance, and you're handcuffing us in multiple ways because you and I love rebalancing and reinvesting. I'd probably go fairly similar where I'm going to dominate the portfolio with those international conglomerates, and then I might sprinkle in or it'll be conglomerates, fully mature tech companies, and then I might have like one or two VCs, like not VC, but like startups in there. So I was thinking about when you're talking, is there an exciting startups that you would think that you feel have a decent runway for 10 years? You'd be happy to hold them.
Startups is a tough one. So when I was contemplating asking you this question, I really was thinking public markets only. I wasn't thinking private markets, but private markets is an interesting one to consider. I think they largely, especially in the tech space, track, they largely track the NASDAQ. So at least last year, valuations had come way in. It would have been an interesting time to buy. This year, NASDAQ's up 30%. So, strong rebound. Who knows where valuations are at? I mean, I will say I've made private investments where in the last year that I don't expect to see any money for a decade. So there are certainly companies I've been willing to do that, but all of my money, like the point, like that's why I wanted to drive here 100%. And I think most of the stuff I'm investing in is either successful or failure. And I'm not going to do that with 100% of my money.
Well, you're making me think about two things. One, when you expand that, I did start to think about geographic diversification, but is there anything top of mind? And this is just maybe our lack of being in equities or individual equities of like top of mind conglomerates in like Latin America, Australia, Asia, Europe. I don't have a lot of like top of mind of what I've been in, but like I still think it doesn't change my original thesis. I still want those conglomerates, but now I can diversify across LVMH, Berkshire, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, like that. But otherwise, like a Snowflake or something like that, maybe throwing it in there where they probably have like the largest runway, or Shopify wouldn't be bad either, trying to think about, but a lot can change in 10 years. So it's really hard. It's so funny because you would think 10 years, you want the businesses on the vanguard and pushing technology, but we keep going to like really boring old school businesses, which is kind of shocking when you think about it.
So I went a different way with this than you. I started to think, okay, how can I start to get my portfolio to look like the broad US market? Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, if I'm constraining myself to equal weight and no rebalance, that means every stock I buy is 10%. All right, so I'm probably going to pick two names from communication services sector. I'm picking 2 names from the tech sector. I'm picking 1 name, and I was going to try to get sector weights as close as I could, which would get really hard when you get to utilities and real estate and materials. Like they're all too small under the sub 10, but maybe I'd get 1 energy name in there. Right. And then what I was going to do is for every sector, I was just going to think about picking one of the biggest names in that sector. And the goal was to get something that looked like a statistical sampling of the S&P 500.
No, I think that's a great way of doing it. That's why I think of the conglomerates. Right. That's why I think of the conglomerates, because when you look through, it was like how much sector exposure you got. Like you said, like you're probably not going to necessarily, once again, not investment advice. We don't know what we're talking about. But like you're probably not going to do terribly wrong with like an Exxon is another one, like you were saying, that I thought about. Moody's, Domino's Pizza, those kind of, like, I mean, it's some of it are niche, but some have tentacles. If you're talking about like Exxon, they have tentacles everywhere, and it's just not. And then you're also almost getting a tangential renewables play as well, because nobody's investing in renewables more than like Exxon or BP. So you get both, right? You're getting every form of a kind of energy in there.
I notice you didn't mention Tesla. You're not going to buy Tesla, Jason?
If I'm going to a car company, I'm going like one of the conglomerates ones, and like I'm not buying Tesla. The other one, I was trying to think of the geographic diversification. What's the Latin American bank that was started by the Brazilians? That's like really was like Nubank. That's really pushing the forefronts of banking in South America. I was just thinking, like, if you wanted some financial, I'd rather have financial exposure to like emerging economies, maybe.
Yeah, I think in my head, I'm still keeping it mostly U.S. I haven't gone. I like that you're going international quickly, though. That's interesting. Okay, so last piece, you got to keep it at 10, but now you can rebalance and you can choose how you weight them. So, for example, you could go as extreme as I'm choosing 10 names and I'm going to momentum weight them every month, or I'm choosing 10 names and I'm inverse volatility weighting them once a year. You could equal weight and rebalance. It's totally up to you. You could keep rebalancing so they're broadly in line with market cap.
Oh man, this is such a tough one, and I feel we might diverge here. Over a long enough time horizon, I think 1/n is the best diversification strategy, or the most robust one, and it's almost like we talk about halvesies. Unless like you're weighing based on like one of them is like a extreme tech play or something like that, then you need to attenuate maybe to some volatility or inverse volatility weighting. Maybe you worry about market cap, float, weight. But I think decades starting to get into that range. If we're talking multiple decades, I'm probably going 1/n. And then it's much more about the rebalancing frequency. And then I would want to use rebalancing bands to work on my rebalancing effects. Some would argue, I guess you could go for the real momentum plays and let them get outsized. And like you're trying to win, I'd probably go with that. Like also like this is interesting. Like as the history and literature on like coffee can portfolios, like we may do all this and then you're better off not even touching it. So that's always the default play as well. But I go equal weight with rebalancing bands that probably end up rebalancing maybe once or twice a year. What are your thoughts?
So one of the things you brought up that I intentionally didn't ask you and we haven't discussed is like, okay, I said you had to invest in this portfolio and you couldn't touch it for a decade. But we never really discussed like, okay, what does that mean to us? What are our objectives?
What's the goal? Yeah.
What's the goal, right? Is it just to have a reasonable growth? Like, is it to make sure that your dollar is at least worth more than $1 at the end of that decade? Like, that's a very different objective than I want to maximize the growth of that portfolio or the expected potential growth, right? Again, I think of it as like, if I'm putting 100% of my money in there, there's a huge component for me that is going to be capital preservation is important. I don't want to wake up in a decade and have 70% of my money gone because I was shooting for the fence, swinging for the fences.
Yeah, part of that though too is like it's just like if you were, if you're an old school pirate, floating on the open seas, like you would not, you'd prefer to diversify across an armada instead of like a single ship, and then you could have a mutiny aboard your ship. So it really is, what is your teleological goals and your broad diversification? And part of that is, we do this podcast and this show as just a a show of love for our fellow pirates out there. And so all we ask in return is a pirate's pinky promise. And part of that pirate's pinky promise is that you just hit that subscribe button, that notification bell, especially on YouTube. I know a lot of you are listening out there on audio. Shout out to Pirate Jim, who I had lunch with the other day, fulfilling his pirate pinky promise, also, reaching out and trying to create that pirate network. I know he's probably going to be listening when he's walking the dogs on Monday, but that pirate pinky promise, all we ask in return, we're out here working hard in our pirate sweaters. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button, that notification bell on YouTube, because that's where we want to see the growth. Corey, I'm also noticing, maybe when I was walking down the streets of Philadelphia, I saw some crooked pinky fingers. I think they were holding them up as that's the other sign.
A sign of recognition.
It's sign of recognition. Now, maybe I'm just delusional, and maybe I think, there's more fans than I think out there. But I swear I saw some crooked pinkies being, held into the air as that pirate pinky promise.